Good morning or good afternoon or good evening, depending on where in the world you're joining from today. Thanks for joining our Tuesday live stream to talk about digital transformation. This is a live stream that we do every Tuesday as part of our live production of our Transformation Ground Control podcast. So this interview will actually become part of our weekly Transformation Ground Control podcast, which will get released a week from tomorrow, a week from Wednesday. So thanks for being part of the production of this show. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent consulting firm that helps clients through their digital transformation journeys. And I do this live stream every Tuesday to interview different guests and different people to talk about all things related to digital transformation, whether it's the people, process, technology, strategy, or any other part of digital transformation. So thanks for being here today. I'm going to introduce my guest in just a moment. Today's topic is organizational change management. And we're actually continuing a series that we started accidentally a few weeks ago, partly because I didn't have a good topic. So I thought I'd try a different format. It worked really well. We had a lot of great engagement from the audience. So I thought I'd try it again here today. And that format is sort of a consultant hot seat. So we pull one of our senior team members from the Third Stage team, and we just ask them a bunch of questions, and we fire away with picking their brains on anything related to transformation. And I encourage you to do the same. I'm going to start with some questions here today, but I encourage the audience to ask questions of myself and my guest here today. So before we get started, before I introduce our guest, if you could do me a favor, all of you listening here live today, whether it's on LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter, or Facebook, if you could just drop in the chat where you're joining from today. I'd love to know what city you're in, what country you're in, just to get a feel for our global audience here today. So if you don't mind, just drop in the chat where you're joining from today, so we understand our audience a little bit better. That'd be a huge help. And I appreciate your help there. So today's topic, as I mentioned, is organizational change management. It's a commonly misunderstood term, but a very important term for any digital transformation. And it's one of those things that I think a lot of people know intuitively that needs to happen in a successful digital transformation, but more often than not, they fail to address change management well. So that's what we want to cover here today is what is change management? How does it apply to digital transformation? What are some best practices within digital transformation as it relates to change management? And anything else you want to talk about. So this is really meant for the audience here today. Like I said, I'll start the questions, but really encourage you to ask anything you'd like to ask as well. So all that being said, while people are dropping in the chat where they're from here today, I wanted to go ahead and introduce our guest here today. He's someone who's been with the Third Stage team for quite some time now. Seems like forever, but it hasn't been forever, but it feels like a long time. And that is Nate Stroeher, who's a director and practice lead here at Third Stage Consulting. So Nate, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Eric. Nice to be here.
Yeah, great to have you. It's great to have all the guests here today. And maybe just to start, before we dive into the consultant hot seat questions I have for you to start, maybe just tell us a little bit about yourself and your background.
I started out after grad school working at Deloitte Consulting, worked around for their digital transformation, finance transformation group, worked on a lot of software implementations and change management processes around the implementation of technology. We also worked with a lot of mergers and acquisitions and organizing and bringing functions together through these newly acquired individual organizations. So have a fairly technical background, but also have spent about the last 10 years of my career really focusing on change management piece of digital transformation and how the organization can best position itself to take advantage of the new technology or the new opportunities that arise.
Great. So just out of curiosity, what led you down the path of change management versus any of the other paths you could have gone within the world of consulting and transformation?
I think mostly it was just a natural extension, and we found in most of our technology implementations, companies were really doing a great job, and we had a lot of success implementing technology. But it was really that third stage, the little plug for our company name, but it was really that third stage, and it was that missing piece that once you had this great technology in place that you spent a lot of resources, a lot of time, a lot of money to get in place, it was really trying to help organizations take advantage of that. We were seeing so many organizations that did all they could to get through to the finish line, or what we consider the finish line being the go live, and then only to turn around and say, we've got this great piece of technology, but we really haven't changed our organization or positioned our organization well to take advantage of all the benefits that we knew were there from the beginning that we now have, but we're not equipped to take advantage of.
Yeah. So they're implementing technology, but not really getting the full value out of it, not changing their processes and organization in any materially significant way.
Yeah. I use the analogy often that it was they went out, they did all their homework, they figured out just exactly what they would need in a new car. They got the new car, got inside, and were not able to drive it. They knew some of the small intricacies, but really weren't able to take advantage of all the new features and all the new technology that they had invested in.
Yeah. Couldn't get the car out of second gear, or whatever analogy you want to use there.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I guess for those of us that maybe don't fully understand change management, or haven't been directly involved, or maybe we've struggled with change management in the past, or we just sort of intuitively know what it is at a high level, maybe just help us understand what is change management. How would you summarize it in terms of what it is?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, and I actually, in getting ready for this last night, I went through and Googled change management, and I think it's really interesting. As we were talking about earlier, Eric, there's literally thousands and thousands of definitions. One of my favorites was change management is the application of a structured process and set of tools for leading the people side of change to achieve a desired outcome. I read that only because if you go through and you Google change management, you're going to find a whole bunch of different ways to say really the same thing. And that is, how are you going to best position the individuals within an organization to take advantage of the new technology, the new opportunity, or whatever it is you're trying to change? And I know we often think of change management as around a technology implementation, a technology selection, but it's really any major change that an organization is going through, and it's positioning those people and your organization to best take advantage of that.
Yeah, that's well put. It's such a broad topic. Sometimes it's hard just to distill it down to just a real basic introductory summary like you just did. So I appreciate that. That's helpful. So why is that so important? Everything you just described, why is that so important to digital transformation or being successful in a digital transformation?
Well, I think it's successful, and back to the analogy we just used, it is, organizations are call third stage consulting and go through these organizational changes because whatever they're changing to is putting them in the best position to achieve their vision and their goals for the future. And really, or change management is so important because there's going to be change with any technology implementation or any opportunity that you seize as an organization. So it's really important because, again, it's not only getting the technology enablers that you have, but it's really being able to take best advantage of those and putting the right people in the right place to take advantage of the opportunities that are in front of them.
Right. So why is it you think that so many organizations struggle with that? I mean, as you're describing it, it doesn't sound that complicated. It doesn't sound that difficult, but why is it that so many organizations do in fact struggle with that?
I think probably the main reason that organizations struggle with it is that when you talk about, and we'll focus today mostly around technology implementations, but when you talk about technology implementation, you're coming out of, or you're facing what's going to be probably one of the biggest investments that an organization made. Some of these technology implementations that we have been a part of over the years have been into the $5-10 million range. And so an organization is not only putting all their resources into that, they're putting a ton of cash into it, but they're also change management is just an unknown. So while it's really it's easier to sit down and say, here's how we're going to select a technology, here's how we're going to implement a technology. Change management's a little more of the soft and fuzzy side, where there's really, it's not an exact science of how you're going to do it. And organizations really, I think, often we find that they're really kind of at that fatigue point where they say, hey, we're putting everything we can into getting this technology in place, we'll worry about change management later, or we'll worry about our people later and how they're best going to be able to take advantage of the technology.
Yeah. Or our people will change because we'll tell them to change. That's the other common thing we hear with executives, especially. You think it can't be that difficult. I'm just going to tell them they have to change. And by the way, they're excited for the change because they don't like their old systems. They don't like the inefficient processes. So how hard could it really be? I think that's a dynamic we see a lot with our clients. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. Yeah. And we're actually, that it's interesting you bring that up, because we kicked off a client 3 months ago, and we talk about, we're constantly talking about the PTSD that they show from an old implementation that they did 5 years ago. And it was just exactly what you said. They said, hey, the leaders of the organization said, technology wise, we will get this put in and we will do this very well. People will learn to change. They'll learn to adapt. They'll learn to take advantage of the technology. There was really no end user input, or no focus on the change management. So literally it's been described to us over and over again as January 1st, they came in, turned their computers on, and it was the mentality of get on your computer, learn how to use the system. You're going to be so much better off. This will be a great thing. When really, in reality, they had never done anything before that to get them to the point where they're going to be able to take advantage of what they had in front of them.
Yeah. Yeah. It seems like a lot of times project teams that are involved in sort of the day-to-day components of a transformation project, whether it's the design or the testing or the whatever aspect of a transformation. And I think a lot of times people forget to empathize with people that aren't involved in the day-to-day. You have a small group of people that are the project core team, or even the subject matter experts that are supporting a project. And I think a lot of times it seems like those team members don't realize how far ahead they are because they're involved in the project day-to-day. They understand the changes, but then when it gets rolled out to the rest of the organization, it's sort of shock to the system, and it's a surprise to everyone. And that's the last thing you want, is a big surprise, at go live.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I'll get back to my questions here in a few minutes, but first I want to turn to the audience here, because we're already getting some good questions that are worth talking about here. But before I get to those questions, I just want to thank everyone for dropping the chat where you're from today. We've got people from all over the world, Colombia in South America, a couple people from Denver and Parker, Colorado, Ghent, Belgium, Evergreen, Colorado, Netherlands, Minnesota, Mali in West Africa, Calgary, Canada, UAE, Georgia, a lot of different UK. So a lot of different places throughout the world. I think we cover just about every continent here. So I appreciate everyone joining, especially at odd hours for some of you here today. So the first question from the audience that I want to get to, which is from Ray on LinkedIn, who's actually a past client of mine from way back when, before I started Third Stage. But he asked the question here, do you use ADKAR? But before you answer that, Nate, maybe, if you could describe just at a high level, without getting into a ton of detail, just what is ADKAR? Maybe we'll start there and then ask, how maybe I'll sort of shift the question a little bit to how does ADKAR fit into change management?
And I think, Ray, you're referring to the Prosky ADKAR model. And I think I would say that while we don't use that specifically, I think somewhat what I alluded to earlier is all of the different methodologies that we use are all of the different methodologies in use, and specifically what we use is probably a slight variation of that, but it's really kind of along the same lines, and it really is coming in and determining just exactly where an organization is. And it starts with the kind of the org readiness. What is the vision of the organization? And really that first starting point is the critical piece. That is, where are we now and where do we think we're going? And how will this technology change enable us to get to where we're going? That's real important. And that's a step I think we struggle with almost every one of our clients is that thought of, hey, we're all on the same page. We all know where we're going. And then when you really sit down and you get the executives in a room and say, okay, let's get all 12 of you to define exactly where you're going. What starts out as a 1 or 2 hour workshop can often turn into a whole day workshop of really trying to figure out, where are we now, where are we going, and how will this technology enable us? So that's really the starting point, and then it really jumps right into determining how ready an organization is, the organizational readiness for this change.
Yeah, yeah, and a lot of our team members are ProSci certified and use variations of the ADKAR methodology. So it's good to kind of unpack that a bit more. And I always like to talk about the way you just did, Nate, in terms of not so much the methodology itself, but just conceptually, how does it work and how does it apply to change management? Here's another interesting question. I'd be curious to get your feedback on. And whoops, we just lost our feed here. There you are. You're back.
Yeah.
So here's another question that is a really interesting one, and I think this is a awesome question that applies to a lot of different situations. But in this case, the question is how do you manage change management in institutions that are non-flexible, such as the military? And that's from Gustavo on LinkedIn. So whether it's the military or maybe a well-established, mature organization that's been around forever, has highly tenured employees, or for whatever reason, and they're a little bit more resistant to change or difficult to change. How do you manage those situations differently, or do you manage those situations differently than other less resistant cultures?
Yeah, and I think that's a difficult question, because I don't think there's a one size fits all answer to that. But I think really it really starts at the beginning of when you're talking about any change. And again, we're usually brought in with a software selection or a platform selection that we're helping an organization with. So really starting right at the beginning of those conversations and trying to draw out from the organization, where do you stand? How, what have your failures in the past been? Why are you choosing to get this new technology now? And really including this change management piece from the beginning, and to sit down and say, we understand that you have these technology challenges, but really what beyond that is, when you look at the three pieces, people, process, and technology, we've established the technology piece. Now let's look at where you are from a people and a process point of view, and really just starting that from the beginning. And again, not a one size fits all, because every organization is different, and every organization is going to be resistant to change in a different way.
Yeah, and you mentioned the organizational readiness assessments that we do for clients a few minutes ago, and that's why that piece is so important, is because you have to understand not only the fact that an organization is more resistant to change than maybe other organizations, but more importantly, you have to understand why. Why are they resistant to change? Is it because the employees have been around forever? Maybe the employees don't have the right skill set. Maybe there's a lack of leadership or a lack of communication that sort of creates a difficulty navigating change as an organization. So once you understand those root causes, or sort of what are the cultural nuances of that organization, then you can attack it. Then you can go after, from a change management perspective, and attack those root causes that are specific to that organization. So I think it's a good point, and sort of a good reminder that as helpful as change management methodologies and tool sets are, they need to be applied differently depending on what the situation is and what you're trying to accomplish.
Exactly. Yeah.
It also begs a question too. This isn't part of the question necessarily, but maybe I'll just sort of add on to it. What about there's organizations that struggle with change more than others. I mean, I think every organization in general, as a broad generalization, struggles with change. As much as we like to think our organization maybe is a little bit more open than others, the reality is change management and the change process is more difficult than most people realize until they go through it. But I think the other thing to think about from a change management perspective is how much are you willing to change as an organization? I think you have to be honest with yourself. And I think that's where a lot of companies get into trouble, is they say, we're working off an old green screen legacy system now, and we want to go to a fully baked, cloud solution with analytics and all this, artificial intelligence, machine learning, all this advanced technology. And that's a huge jump. And that's okay, but you've got to be ready to recognize that is a huge jump, and there's a high risk from a change management perspective. And then also on the flip side, also recognize that it's okay to take more incremental steps. I mean, if you're risk adverse, or you recognize that your company or your organization is going to have difficulty changing, like if you're part of the military or the government or whatever the case may be, then maybe you just take more of an incremental approach over time. And I think that's what a lot of organizations fail to do, is align, the general strategy with who they are as an organization. Have you seen that as well, or Is that
Yeah,
right?
That's a great. Sorry to cut you off, but that's that's exactly what we're going through with. We have a large manufacturer in Texas and Colorado. They have facilities in both states. They're very, very heavily paper based. I would say they're one of the. This organization is probably more run on Excel spreadsheets and paper than any I've ever seen throughout my career. The one thing, the message we've been delivering to them from the beginning is that you really need to take baby steps. Like you will have, eventually you will have technology that will make your organization run seamlessly from beginning to end. However, if you go through and you throw most of your employees that are used to working off spreadsheets off a paper routing system throughout the manufacturing process, and you throw them right into all the functionality that the new software offers, you're gonna overload them. So we're really saying, get the system in place, make sure that the employees are good with and comfortable with the basic functionality, and then start to build the system up from there. Then start to really get to what the overall capabilities of the system are. But if you do it all at once, you're taking people that are really not very computer savvy, not comfortable with a computer, and you're just gonna flood them right off the bat.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good point. I think it's a good reminder that there's a prerequisite to successful change management. In other words, there's certain foundational alignment sorts of things that need to happen before you can be successful in change management. And we see this a lot where the overall transformation strategy or the digital strategy and the magnitude of change a company is trying to go through is too great, and you're setting your change management team up for failure. Or the magnitude of change is expected to happen in too compressed of a time frame, and so that creates even more resistance to change and more change management issues. And so you have to make sure you've got a realistic strategy to begin with, or else no matter how good your change team is, you're not going to be able to navigate that change well. So I think that's a good reminder that it starts really early in the process to make sure you've got a good alignment and a clear strategy. So there was another good question here I wanted to get to. This question here from Raphael on LinkedIn was a good one, sort of building on a point you made earlier, Nate, about determining organizational readiness. How do you determine organizational readiness? Is there a measuring stick? What do you have to say to that?
Whereas I don't think there's quite a measuring stick, but I think how we at Third Stage determine organizational readiness is we'll go out, we'll meet with all the different end user groups, and it's really through surveys, through workshops, and through meeting with them, determining what their requirements are. It really gives us an opportunity to go through and determine what are basically what I'll call like the general change themes. And then within those, each organization within, or each function within the organization is going to be in a different spot. So for example, we have a client right now, and we've broken down all the different functions: finance, manufacturing, sales, and marketing. And everyone is going to be, face the same change themes, but it's going to be different. Finance is really going to experience not a lot of change. They're going to have some minor changes in the way they deal with the system, some of the terminology they use. They won't have that big of a change. But the sales and marketing team is facing a whole new set of functionality. So they're really going to be where we're going to be focusing most of our efforts, and that is getting the right people in place, getting them trained, putting the new skill sets in place to take advantage of the technology. So I would say that while there's not a measuring stick, we do try and come up with the common change themes, and then really dig into each division or each function within the organization to find out just exactly who needs what degree of help throughout this change process.
Yeah. Yeah, and a lot of times, if there is a quote unquote measuring stick, a lot of times you're measuring those different the readiness of different parts of your organization. So you might find that there's certain departments or there's certain locations within your organization that are going to resist the change. And when we talk about resistance to change, by the way, let me just back up. We talk about resistance to change. Usually, it's not intentional resistance. Usually there's other things that are driving the resistance. It's not that I want to sabotage the project. That's not why I resist change. I resist change because I'm afraid of the change, and I feel like my job's jeopardized or my value to the organization is being jeopardized. So I'm going to unintentionally and maybe subtly resist that change. But a lot of times you find that certain parts of the organization are more resistant or are going to have more difficulty adapting to the change than others. And so that's one sort of measuring stick. And then, we as consultants oftentimes, almost always, will compare an organization or a client to other clients. Certain ones are more or less resistant than others, and that kind of gives you a qualitative measuring stick, if you will, in many ways. Even though our organizational readiness is quantitative and qualitative in nature, you still have to add that sort of the art to it of understanding how different organizations operate. What about, here's an interesting question that I really like, and I'm going to add to it a little bit. I hope you guys don't mind that I'm spinning the questions a little bit, but the question is, this is from Ty on LinkedIn. He asks, can you share a couple of examples of how in-house change management teams have overcome the challenge of being brought into engagements late in the change process? Before we answer that, though, maybe you could just talk about what happens or what's the common dynamic when change management teams come into the process too late. You wait till right before training. Let's just say you bring in the change team to come train people on the software. What are some of the consequences of bringing in change teams late? And then we can kind of get back to Ty's question here.
Well, I think, and this is a very timely example because the client that I mentioned that we just kicked off, we're being brought in about halfway through an implementation. So we're experiencing this right now. And the phrase that we keep using is we're learning to fly the plane while it's in the air. But I think that the really important thing to note, and what we've stressed with our client throughout, is it's never too late to get engaged. And really what we're doing with this client is coming in and saying, okay, this is how our normal engagement would be, normal change management engagement would proceed. And laying out, okay, from beginning to end, this would normally be, say, a 9-month process, and here's the steps we would take. Then we sit down and we assess, okay, we're here, so we're joining about 4 months into it, and we have these 4 months to make up. But I think it's really taking a step back and going through the process or following the process from beginning to end to make sure that, again, we go back to what's our vision, how ready is the organization for change, and what do those change elements that need to be put in place, what are those, and how do we put those in place? So again, it's not abandoning the process, but it's really going back and saying, let's take a realistic approach on where we are now, what we need to do to make up, all while staying current with what we have now. And it's a delicate balance, and we're, we struggle every day with it, trying to say, okay, we need to keep moving forward, but we also need to make up these steps in the past, because they're all very important towards that ultimate goal.
Right. Yeah, that's a good real life current case study of a current client that where we're experiencing that exact same dynamic. And fortunately, it's not, it's never too late, but it certainly makes it more challenging as you defer, as you delay the change management process. And maybe taking your example, Nate, to a more extreme, I'll call it a hypothetical example, although we've seen this a million times before. But the organization that waits even longer and says, okay, training starts here in a few weeks, let's go ahead and bring in the change management team to start getting ready for training the end users. And this is something we see a ton with software vendors and big system integrators. They say they're going to do change management, and they do a little bit of change management, but their definition of change management is come in and train people on the software. So you end up, by definition, you're doing change management late in the process. And again, I don't want to say it's too late. It's never too late, but things are really difficult when you wait that long. And what you end up seeing is that you end up really focusing on change management for the first time, aside from maybe a few project newsletters and all employee updates on, hey, exciting news about the system and we're going live on this date. I'm not counting that as change management right now, even though that is technically change management. But the real substantive change management, in this case, if they don't start till training, then what happens is people have their freak out moments during go live or pre-go live training. and you're just days or weeks from go live, and now you're springing all these changes on people, and it's just too much for the organization to absorb. And so therefore, that's where things get off track, or the wheels come off the train, so to speak, when you wait that long. So I think that's, I'm giving you maybe a more extreme but common example of what happens when you wait too long. But I think the way you put it, I think that's a common dynamic too, is just trying to figure out how we navigate that, even if we start a bit later than we'd like. Is it ever too early to start change management? Have you seen organizations that started it too early and is just a waste of time?
No, I don't think it is, but I think it's I think it's again important if you do start early, and there's a ton of advantages to starting early. In fact, we have a client who's not even they've selected their technology and they're not going to start implementing for another 2.5 months, but we've actually started them on some of the change management concepts. And so I think it's important, if you do start early, take advantage of the fact that you've got that extra time, but really, again, follow the process. And for this client, some of the things that we're working with them now is to say, we're not 100% sure exactly what your ultimate technology solution is going to look like. We know the software, we know the platform, but we do know that you have 25 years of old data that you need to clean up. We have training programs that have been implemented in the past that have kind of fluttered and have never really taken shape. So let's go through and really determine what your training strategy is and how you're going to train your employees. So there's a lot of those things that we can say, this has nothing to do with our ultimate technology solution, but we know that these are some things that you have to address no matter where you're going. So again, it's sticking to that process. You could just take some of the steps and scoot them up to the beginning and do those while you're waiting for that ultimate technology solution, and then you can just follow the process seamlessly from there.
Yeah. Well, I don't know about you, but I'd love to meet a client someday that says, hey, one of my biggest mistakes I made in this project is I started change management too early, or I did too much change management. I haven't met anyone that's come anywhere close to saying that, but have you? I'm just curious.
No, not at all.
I'd love to meet that person. If any of you listening to the live stream here today feel like you've had a situation where you've invested too much in change management, or you started it too early, please drop it in the chat. I'd love to hear this case study, because I'm dying to meet that person, that one organization that just overdid it with change management. They regret spending too much time and money on change management. I would argue that organization probably doesn't exist, but it'd be awesome if it did. Then let us know. Okay, so a couple. This is just more of a note from our marketing team at Third Stage. They make a comment here that last week's episode of the Digital Stratosphere podcast discusses company culture and its role in organizational change management. So if you don't already, if you go to YouTube if you go to Third Stage's YouTube channel or any of the podcast platforms, you can find Digital Stratosphere, which is a sister podcast to the one that the long form podcast that I host, which is Transformation Ground Control. So anyway, if you go to that podcast, you can find the episode with company culture. Here's an interesting question, Nate, from Marco on LinkedIn, and I'll see if I can show the whole question here on the screen for those of you watching. How do the more agile approaches in ERP implementations currently impact the change journey and phasing? Only positive or also negative impacts possible? So maybe you just kind of broaden that a bit, or maybe I'll try to rephrase it. Fast agile approaches to, or I shouldn't say faster or perceived faster approaches to change to ERP implementations or digital transformation. How does that affect the change journey in general? I mean, do you see Agile affecting change management, or what are your thoughts there?
Well, I think it doesn't change the overall change management process, but I think the one advantage that you have with the Agile type implementation methodologies, or these, more of the quick, instantaneous methodologies, is that you are able to take advantage of some of the lessons. Well, not some. You're able to take advantage of the lessons learned earlier on. So the nice advantage of it, and we again have had clients that have used the Agile implementation methodology, and it really gives us a quick snapshot throughout the process of this works. Here's how we can adjust our training. Here's how we can adjust adapting our skill sets. So in some ways, I would say it doesn't change it at all. In other ways, I think that the real advantage is you have the opportunity to learn from what you're doing in that agile implementation. The one thing you do have to be careful of, though, is that you're really coming at the whole overall implementation process in little whatever we'd say 4 to 6 week chunks. So you've got to make sure that you look at, here's the overall change management process, and not get really wrapped up in the flavor of the day or the implementation of the day.
Yeah. And I think, the beauty of Agile is that it encourages teams to move fast and to do sprints and to prove value faster. So you're not waiting years to get some sort of value out of an implementation or out of a transformation. But the risk is, from a change management perspective, the risk is that in the name of getting technology rolled out faster, oftentimes you're bypassing some of those change management activities. And not only the activities, but the organization itself doesn't fully understand what the impact of the organization is going to be. So while Agile on one hand allows you to roll out things quickly in sprints and sort of minimum viable products, and you learn from it and you pivot and you improve it, that's great. But the change, if you're a change team, that's like a moving target. You're trying to figure out, like, what is this technology? What's the impact? How are jobs going to be affected? And that's a big problem that people don't often talk about with Agile. They think they focus on the technology and the speed of rolling out technology, but they don't look at the consequences of the organizational change piece. So I'd argue there's some pretty significant risk there that are often overlooked. And
I think to add on to what you're saying, Eric, and training is such a point example, is that there's certain functionality you obviously have to train the end user on as the sprints, as you come to the end of a sprint. So there's that balance between what's your overall training strategy and how are you going to keep employees current throughout the life of the software, but also what we would say is what would they need to do today to be able to get on the system and make it functional, and then what's that overall strategy. And those are often two different things. And so if you lose sight of one for the other, you can really get into a pickle, because you can train a lot of employees, they'll get on the system, they'll be able to use it, but they'll never really go through that whole training process of really being able to take advantage of what's the full functionality of the system. They'll just be able to get on, use the system, do their day-to-day job, but never really take advantage of what it's capable of.
Right. Yeah. Well said. Here's a couple comments, just more interesting context or additions to what you said already, Nate. But this is from Juiced or Used. I apologize. I'm not sure how to pronounce your name. I should, because he and I have been connected forever, and he engages with me all the time on LinkedIn. I think it's Used, but if I mispronounce that, please correct me. But anyway, change management should start at the point of, let's look at a new system. That's his 2 cents. Would you agree with that? I think that's sort of like what you were saying is.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And it's interesting because a lot of times it almost sounds counterintuitive. I totally agree with the comment, by the way, but it sounds counterintuitive oftentimes to project teams and executives, because they think, well, how can we start change management? We don't even know what the technology is. Well, there's a lot you could do, you should be doing to set the foundation, just to understand your current organization, the processes, and understanding where you're starting from and how big of a jump that's going to be, back to what we were talking about before. And then Lulu on YouTube made the comment that I think I started late. So we were talking about earlier about, do you start early, do you start late, on time or whatever. So it sounds like she unfortunately feels like she started late. I'd be curious to hear more, Lulu, if you're so inclined, anything you're noticing, in your project so far from starting late, any change issues you're experiencing or concerns you have that might help us maybe unpack that a bit more, and maybe use that as a discussion point. Here's an interesting point that I think is a really good one, a really good basic fundamental change management concept. And this is from Albert on LinkedIn. He says, for change management, please remember your colleagues are always asking what's in it for me or with them. You need to get their buy-in. So what are your thoughts there, Nate?
Well, I think it's again, sitting down, and when you talk about what's in it for me, kind of going back to that first point, and that is where where do you see your organization as part of or your function as part of the overall organization? Where do you see them now, and where do you see them in the future? And how will this technology how will this technology enable you to get to where you want to be? And then it's really sitting down and saying, when you say what's in it for me, it's how where are you now, and how capable do you realistically think you are towards taking advantage of that technology? And if individuals within the organization are honest and really do a good job of sitting down and saying where they are, they'll realize that there is need for change. Again, I go back to the client that we're talking about that's very paper based. They know that that as they grow, that there's two solutions to taking advantage of this growth that they're encountering, and that is either work 12 hours a day, 15 hours a day to try and keep up with the demand, or automate and get into a new technology that will enable them to do their job better, smarter, and faster. So it's really, it's again probably not a real concise answer, but it really is trying to show them as much as possible, here's the advantages, and realistically, how capable or how ready are you to take advantage of what this new platform will enable you to do in the future.
Yeah. Well said. Just going through the questions and comments here, Nate, since this is a consultant hot seat format, I have to show you this comment because it may embarrass you a little bit, just knowing your personality, but I'm going to do it anyway. So this is from Mitch on LinkedIn. He says, high praise for Nate and his knowledge and expertise within the digital transformation and change management domain. Can speak from firsthand experience the value he brings to the table. So kudos to you, Nate. You've got a fan here listening live. So thank you, Mitch, for the kind words there. That's very kind. I agree with you, by the way, Mitch. Nate is very knowledgeable on this stuff and very good at it. So here's a question. Where was it? Okay, here's the question I want to get to, which, again, I'm going to add maybe my own spin to it here. And this is from Jude on YouTube. Jude says, what's the ideal change management approach for Microsoft 365 rollouts, Microsoft rollouts of updates for its products that improve collaboration and productivity of employees? The reason I like this question is not so much that it's focused just on Microsoft 365, but it's maybe a broader question. I think you sort of alluded to this earlier, Nate, but maybe we could go back to this point. But whether or not the technology or the specific type of technology you're rolling out, does that affect the organizational change approach that you take? Is it universal across different platforms, or is there something you would do different for something as fundamental as a Microsoft 365 rollout that affects everyone in an organization? Or kind of what would you say to that?
I think the answer is a little bit of both, and I think that it really, be it Microsoft 365, Epicor, Oracle, whatever implementation you have, I think what's really more important is what level of change that introduces to the organization. So again, if you're the Microsoft, I think Microsoft has one advantage in the sense that we all use a lot of our window-based programs in our daily job, no matter what our ERP package is in the background. So Microsoft has a very comfortable look and feel, which is one advantage of that product. But I think really more importantly is to look at what's the degree of change, and how is someone's job going to change from a day-to-day basis. And again, alluding back to our client earlier, if you're going from a paper-based method, or if you're going from really a paper-based function to really automating the entire process, that's going to be a major change no matter what technology you put in place. So I think it's really more important not to look at the technology, but to look at what's the overall change that's going to take place, and then really figuring out within those software packages or those platforms that you're implementing, what are the basic functionality steps, and how can you take these interim steps to really make the user comfortable and then expand, comfortable, and then expand, so that you just don't overwhelm them, but you're able to take those baby steps and say, oh, now I know how to do this. I'm comfortable with it. Now I can expand to keep going further and further into where the ultimate technology is able to help you do your job on a daily basis.
Yeah. Yeah. And a lot of what it comes down to too, I think is fully defining how you're going to use that technology, whether it's Microsoft 365 or any other product. How are you going to use that, or how's the organization going to use that? And so that you can sort of target the change management to ensure that you're not just getting by, or you're not ensuring that employees can just get by and do the bare minimum, without disrupting their day-to-day jobs, but that they're actually using the technology in a way that's meant to improve the operations. And sometimes with cloud deployments, with something like a Microsoft 365 or any other sort of cloud-based solution, a lot of times it's hard to know, what the functions and capabilities are, because it's changing all the time. And so taking that time, back to the Agile versus waterfall discussion earlier, it's a little bit, some might view this a little bit too waterfall-ish to do this, but if you take that time up front to define what is it, what capabilities are we trying to get out of the system, how's it going to affect our processes, and then how's it going to affect our people, the more you can do that, the better you can do at change management. So that it's sort of a case to maybe moving the needle a little bit back towards waterfall and away from Agile in some ways. But I think, that's the key, in my opinion, is really defining that future state so that how Microsoft 365 or whatever the product is going to be used.
And I think to just elaborate a little more on that before we move on, the example I always love to give is around reporting and analytics. And with organizations, you traditionally come in and they say, okay, we have anywhere from 50 to 100 standard reports and ways that we analyze our business, and really stepping back and saying, ultimately, your goal is to have all of your analytics or your dashboard available to you on your phone so that you can run your business from anywhere in the world. And but then stepping back and saying, okay, well, in order to get there, we can't do that today. But what we can do is step back and look at what are the standard reports, what are the standard dashboards that we can put in place now, and allow them to get comfortable with that, get comfortable using that, and really trying to set that stage for, okay, now I know what's possible. Now I know how to use the technology. Now I can keep expanding and moving closer and closer to that ultimate goal that might not happen for 3 months, 6 months, 12 months down the road, but really ultimately getting them there without losing sight of what's going on by overloading them at the beginning.
Right. And I want to come back to Lulu, who made the comment earlier about how they feel like they're starting too early. Their organization feels like they're starting too late. I'm sorry, they're not that unicorn that I've been looking for, which is the company that started too early. This is one that started too late. And so Lulu makes the comment here that I feel like I'm trying to hurry and catch up, and I really don't know what I'm going for, but knowing there's something there. Sorry, just trying to take things in. So, if you have a situation like this where maybe you're listening today, maybe someone in the audience, including Lulu and others, are listening today and say, hey, wow, I haven't done anything yet, and I'm probably too late, or I should have started this a long time earlier. What do you recommend? Like, how do you prioritize, sort of that low hanging fruit of the must haves, the stuff you really should focus on, knowing that you're not going to get to it all, knowing that it's not an ideal situation, but those are the cards you've been dealt. That's the situation. You can't change the current situation. So what do you do in cases like that? Or what do you recommend to Lulu or others that are in that same boat?
Really, the ultimate starting point, no matter where you are, is just getting a true and a realistic assessment of where you are. So it's meeting with the end users and meeting with the executive team and saying, where do we want to go and where do we feel we are today? And that is, again, I'll allude to this client that we're working with. It's sitting down with the end users and sitting down with the different functions and saying, how well do you feel like you've been heard in these requirements gathering sessions? How much input have you had into this ultimate technology solution? Where do you think you're going from a function point of view to support the overall organization in the future? So it's really sitting down and just kind of drawing that line in the sand of where we are and how equipped we are or how ready we are for the change going forward. And then really saying, okay, we're, on this overall project change management implementation or change management initiative, we're 3 steps down when we should be at step 5 based on our timeline, and really just getting that realistic example or realistic assessment of where we are, and then what those steps are, not only to start moving forward, but to make up the first 3 steps that you haven't done. So it's again never too late, but it's really a difficult step, but it really is sitting down and just saying realistically, where are we, and how ready are we for the change, and do we know what the change needs to be, and do we know what we want in the future?
Yeah, that's well put. And a lot of the work we do at third stage is, unfortunately, is project recovery. Things that are either a project has gotten off track, or it's headed in the wrong direction, or it's completely failed, and we get hired to come in and sort of have a SWAT team come in and fix it, basically. And one of the things we find from a change management perspective is really 2 things, or 2 major buckets of recommendation I would add to what you said, Nate. Is one is you mentioned the assessment, kind of understanding where they're at, but also prioritizing and understanding where the biggest change risks are. If there's certain groups within the organization that are particularly vulnerable to resistance to change, or their buy-in is particularly important, and if we don't get that right, then the whole thing's going to fall apart. So that helps you prioritize and say, okay, if we're going to go attack a certain problem or area, let's prioritize. We can't boil the ocean. Times, too much time has gone by. We're not going to be able to do a full-blown, proper, comprehensive change management plan, but we can go in and sort of prioritize and really attack those areas that are either the biggest risks or the biggest opportunity to improve in a short period. The other thing, and this is probably the less popular option, but I think more organizations should really be honest with themselves and ask themselves this, is instead of saying, how do we force fit change management into this time frame, this limited amount of time we have left, maybe you say, we're not going to do that. We're going to actually push out the go live. We're going to take longer to do this. We're going to tell our system integrator, our software vendor, to slow their roll. We're going to go to a slower burn rate with them. We're going to cut back their team, and we're going to redirect some of those resources to change management. People don't like talking about that, partly because the system integrators put an enormous pressure on you not to do that, because it affects their cash flow, their revenue, and they just want you up and running on technology as fast as possible, regardless of what business value you do or don't get out of it. So more organizations, I think, in my opinion, have to look at themselves in the mirror and say, this is my organization, this is my business. I'm going to do what's right for me. And that may entail doing the unpopular decision of pushing out a go live and saying, we're not going to go live in 3 months or whatever it is. We're going to go live in 9 months, and we're going to give ourselves that extra time to really get this change management stuff right. Make sure we've got a clearly defined business processes, all that stuff. Because chances are, if you're running late on change management, there's probably a lot of other things you're probably not, you haven't gotten to as well. It's usually not just a change management delay or a change management coming in too late. It's usually, oh yeah, we haven't done, we're behind on testing, we're behind on all this other stuff. So you really want to look at that realistically and say, is that worth the risk? Because you have to quantify that and say, if we completely disrupt our operations and we can't ship product or we can't service our customers, that's a huge cost to us potentially. So let's get that right. So anyway, I just add that to your comments there, Nate. So I guess maybe just to sort of wrap this all up and sort of bring it all full circle, if an organization is either midstream in a transformation or they're about to start a transformation they're early in the process, regardless of where they are, how do you recommend that project teams get started the change management process? What are some things they could start doing today, from a change management perspective?
I think the most important is to actually the number one step is really sitting down and defining and assembling the right team. And that is making sure you have the right representation, starting at the executive level all the way down. So, it's often overused phrase, and I think a lot of people use it without thinking about it, but it's really figuring out who are the best change agents going forward. And that doesn't have to be the person that's the smartest technology wise, but it's really getting that team together from a leadership point of view and from a functional point of view, of the people that are going to be most important to help you drive the change forward, people that use the system on a daily basis, people that understand the business, understand where their function fits into the entire organization, and it's putting together that team. I think the second, the often overlooked piece is communication. And it's really sitting down and developing a method of communicating with the team and with the organization as a whole. And while I think it often has the wrong sound when we say control the message and deliver the message how you want it, I think it's very important to sit down and let people know where you are, where you're going, and to communicate with them regularly, and get, take care of the fact, or take control of the message, so people know here's where we are and here's where we're going and here's how we're going to get there. And then I think third and final step is, again, really sitting down and being realistic on where we are, and not not sugarcoating it, not saying, well, we think we're here or we think we could get here. Just sit down and say, where are we? And if you're in a as bad of a position as you are, the more realistic you are in realizing where you are and where you want to be, the more you're going to increase your chances for success, the more you're going to put yourself in a better position to succeed in the future.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's really sound advice. And I'll ask maybe our marketing team listening in if they could drop in the chat a link to our guide to change management. It's called the secret sauce of transformation, I think is what it's called. Change management is the culture, or I cannot talk today to save my life. It's a guide to change management and how it's the secret sauce to success and to transformation. So I'll ask our marketing team to drop that in the chat, a link to that white paper and report, because it covers sort of what you just described, Nate, and it covers a lot of what we've talked about throughout today's discussion in more detail. So be sure to check that out on our website. It's a good read. But anyway, I want to thank you, Nate, for joining us here today. This is a great conversation. Really appreciate you taking one for the team and rolling with the punches here with all the audience questions and my rapid fire questions as well. So thanks for being here today.
Great. Thank you. And to everyone on the call, please reach out if there's any questions I can answer for you, or any thoughts I could give you. Please feel free to reach out to me. There's all my information is on our website, and I think Kyler and the team are passing it on through this call today, but happy to discuss any challenges you have, any thoughts you have, or give you any advice I can give you.
Sounds great. Yep. And be sure to subscribe to our podcast, Transformation Ground Control, which you can find on YouTube, on my YouTube channel, or Third Stage's YouTube channel. You can also find it on all the audio podcast platforms as well. So we'll actually take this interview that we recorded today. We're going to edit it and package it within a broader episode of Transformation Ground Control, which will come out, that episode with today's interview will come out a week from tomorrow. So be sure to check that out and subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already, and subscribe to our YouTube channels too. If you haven't already, both Third Stage and myself have YouTube channels where we put out content multiple times a week. So thanks very much for being here, Nate. I really appreciate having you on. And thanks to the audience for all the great questions, really good questions here today. And we will hope to see you next Tuesday in our next Tuesday's live stream as well. So hope you all have a great week in the meantime, and we will see you all soon. Take care.
Thank you.
All right, bye.